My man with the teal thobe, mashallah. Yes.
Mashallah.
Yeah, the big idol, exactly. Give him a little something to think about, right? So it can be all those little things. It could now, if it's a case of consistent bullying, constant bullying, that's going to be a little bit more difficult, right? But we build up resiliency just like we build up anything else. So we can get better at being able to take it, and then becoming smarter in our replies if we choose to go that route, right? So it can be small, it can be medium, it can be large. It's all really everything in between. But what we're always trying to do is, can we improve? Can we bounce back after these difficulties?
So, okay, this bouncing back and resilience and kind of pushing through. What's something that's a misconception or surprising about this whole concept of resilience that we may not know and realize?
So the research shows us that most people that go through terrible things, disasters, traumas, they actually will be okay without any intervention. So they're going to make it through. Does that mean that people don't need some guidance every now and then? Of course not. I'm a counselor. I'm not going to tell you that that's not the case. But most people will be just fine. They researched after 7 years after a flood went through a particular town. There were 98 people. Flood destroyed everything. 7 years after the flood, they wanted to see how the people were doing. Now, what do you think the people might be doing? Talking about how terrible life is, how they never recovered, how they have generational trauma. And these are real things, but this is what we would think might. They found quite the opposite. 75% reported what they call post-traumatic growth. In other words, they got stronger. They said things like, we appreciate life more. We don't take a day for granted. I said, subhanAllah, just say the shahada, you're on the right path. But people actually grow stronger. They actually got better. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us to be resilient. He did not create us to sort of fall apart. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, مَا يُصِيبُ الْمُسْلِمَ مِن نَصَبٍ وَلَا وَصَبٍ وَلَا هَمٍّ وَلَا حَزَنٍ وَلَا غَمٍّ وَلَا أَذًى حَتَّى الشَّوْكَةَ يُشَاكُهَا إِلَّا كَفَّرَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى بِهَا خَطَايَا. No believer is afflicted by these things that we'll mention in a second, except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive them. What are those things? Tiredness, sickness, regret over what's going to come in the future, worry about the future, regret over what's happened in the past, gham, which we could define as depression, maybe not clinical depression, but feeling down, feeling sad, and just general harm. We will be afflicted by all these things, but Allah, even if it's as small as being nicked by a thorn, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive sins. So the one who created us knows that we're built to handle it. If we weren't, then we wouldn't be able to get through it. So this is very important to keep in mind. I think we might think that the default is just it's going to be tough, and it's going to be difficult, and we don't really know how to navigate through it. But we absolutely have the ability to. And the stronger the family, the stronger the community. These are all tools to help us navigate through that, inshallah.
I like how you mentioned Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us to be resilient, as though it was intentional, right? Because He mentions that there are going to be tests. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ in al-ayah. Allah says, we will test you with something of fear and hunger, right? He mentions that there will be trials and tribulations. And I even gave a khutbah yesterday talking about fitna and how fitna is a test, and it's a trial for you to be better in that resilience and coming back and purifying yourself as a result. But the best example of that is the Prophet ﷺ. Are you able to cite any, how was the Prophet ﷺ resilient in his life to where something that we all may know, or educate us on something that we may not know, but in actuality it was a huge sign of resilience?
Well, who is more loved to Allah than the Prophet ﷺ? No one. And the one who's loved the most is tested the most. How many children did he have? 7. How many died in his lifetime? How many did he bury? 6. 6 of the 7. We have the entire year in the seerah is called the year of sadness, when he lost his his emotional support, his financial support, and then he lost his rock in Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. That's an entire year. That's how we remember the seerah, year of sadness, right? He went through a boycott where there was nothing to eat. Did any of that stop him from spreading the message? The slander that they called him, the names that they called him, losing his uncle Hamza radiallahu ta'ala an in such a difficult fashion. Time and time throughout his life we will see that, and of course he was sad. This is very important to understand. It doesn't mean we're robots, right, and we never feel anything because there's difficulty, because he did. But he continued to persevere and get through it and keep coming closer and closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though he was already the closest. So his whole life is a model of resilience.
There's a hadith, subhanAllah, reminds me when you just mentioned he was the best, most beloved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about testing people at levels. Who knows from the audience? Who could tell us? If Allah loves the people, He will test them. إِذَا حَبَّ اللَّهُ قَوْمًا ابْتَلَاهُمْ. If Allah loves a people, He will test them, right? ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ. Then the ones that follow them and the ones that follow them. So testing is a part of life, as you mentioned, Sheikh. And then the Prophet ﷺ, when we look at it, it was full of tests. The year of sadness was one of those. But it's interesting how you mentioned Amul Huzn. Who died in Amul Huzn? The year of sadness. Who died from the Prophet ﷺ's close friends, family? I heard it. Khadija. Who else? Abu Talib. And these two, subhanAllah, were the emotional supports and even social political supports. Emotional being Khadija, right? And then the political support, because the people, he was the kind of the one that stopped the people from harming the Prophet ﷺ. The political, social support was his uncle Abu Talib, who, by the way, did not become what? Not become Muslim. Did not become Muslim. But the Prophet ﷺ was still sad. Right? They called it the year of sadness. So if it's the year of sadness, how do we balance that? The sadness and the grief, and still be resilient? Because we could say be resilient, right? But then the human side of us comes in. I'm sad. You're telling me to be resilient? Like, how do I balance that out?
That's a great question. So the Prophet ﷺ said very beautifully when his son Ibrahim died, he said, إِنَّ الْعَيْنَ تَدْمَعْ وَالْقَلْبَ يَحْزَنُ. The eyes cry and the hearts are sad. وَمَا نَقُولُ إِلَّا مَا يَرْضَى رَبُّنَا. This is the key piece right here. But we don't say that except which pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So difficulty comes, we don't say things like, well, why me? Or I'm such a good person, I pray, why would Allah do this to me? No, those things are not pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But to go through and be sad is a natural part of life. What we don't want to do is completely suppress it, because that causes other problems, right? So we act like nothing is there. But the sadness, when you go through a difficulty, it doesn't 100% go away. I think this is very important to understand, to humanize it, right?
Okay.
When the Prophet ﷺ heard the voice of the sister of Khadija, he would start having memories of who? Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. My father died this year in June. As I was exiting here, the exit was MacArthur. MacArthur was the airport exit that we fly out of. I don't know how many hundreds of times I've taken that exit. Reminds me, I don't forget. Doesn't mean I can't function, doesn't mean I can't move forward, but you don't forget. That presence is just sort of there. So Allah is not saying be a robot and just erase everything, but there's certain ways that we get through this. And so, when we lose someone, what is the sunnah? To come and help the person out, so they don't have to worry about basic things like food, right? That's community right there. Allah didn't say just forget about it and just that's it. Just bounce back, right? Now, as time goes by and things sort of start to settle, then we can start to, it's a little bit less emotions to process because it's very difficult at the beginning, right? Now as we start to process them, now we start thinking, what's going to come next? So now we start thinking, man, really love my father, but inshallah, we will meet in Jannah if I stay on what I'm supposed to do, right? So we have that time to grieve. It's important to give ourselves that time to grieve. That is part and parcel of belief. And to ignore it or pretend it's not there is unhealthy. So we have that balance where we allow ourselves to grieve, and then as things naturally sort of start to settle in, then we start taking steps to how we can move forward. So we'll see sometimes a mother loses her child. I say, what could be worse than that? 3 months later, what happens? She opens up an organization in her child's name, and now there are thousands of people who are benefiting from that, right? This is just one example. That's post-traumatic growth. Is she going to forget her son or daughter? Of course not. Is that just going to go away? Of course not. But now we want to grow. What can we do now? Because Allah is the one who controls everything. So we do what we can control. Wallahu a'lam.
So is this a new terminology that's used within that space, PTG, post-traumatic growth? I know it's PTSD. It's like, is that an antagonist to it? Is that, okay, we still acknowledge PTSD, but allow the PTSD to result into PTG? I'm just using this. I don't know.
Yeah.
Really?
A lot of
Okay.
P's up in there.
Oh, yeah.
So again, there's no doubt people will go through some difficult experiences, severe bullying in school, right? Especially with the whole online atmosphere now, right? It's different. So everyone has individual circumstances, but the ideal scenario when going through a difficulty is how do we bounce back and how do we actually become stronger? And when you look throughout the things we try to do in life, that's kind of how things work, right? So you study for a test, you beat yourself down studying for that test. But then you pass the test, and now you move on to the next grade, or you get a particular license, or you get to the school you want. But you have to put in a lot of effort to get there, right? You got to break the muscle down before you build it back up. So this is all a part of life. But for some reason, when it comes to our religion, we'll be like, well, why has it got to be like this? Well, that's how the rest of life is.
Okay.
So why is Islam any different, right?
Yeah.
So our ultimate goal, whenever we have a difficulty, is to actually come out stronger and better on the other side. PTSD is, that's a whole different topic, but that is basically the idea of having a traumatic event, and then, that can affect people in a different way. For example, abuse, which is, that happens, or severe bullying, which can happen. But either way, we sort of try to work through that so we can get the person to a point of healthy functioning.
Okay. How would you, if we're looking at resilience now and bouncing back, how would you define peer pressure? Because right now, when we talk about peer pressure, majority is going to be with the youth, middle schoolers, high school, elementary schoolers, right? Middle schoolers and high schoolers. What's the connection of resilience with peer pressure? Can you define peer pressure first and then bring that home with resilience?
So I'll do one better than that. I'm going to have this wonderful audience define
Allah.
peer pressure for us. And you can use each other, right? What is peer pressure? What is peer pressure?
Don't worry, if they don't raise their hands, I can easily choose. Oh, okay. Alhamdulillah.
What's that?
Math test? He said math. Math test.
Okay, I'm not totally following. What do you mean by that?
He has a
peer
serious
pre-
face.
Okay.
Okay. Can you expound on that? What do you mean? Okay, so peer pressure is something that's hard? No, P-E-E-R. No, P-E-R. Yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe in middle school, I realized that in school, all the kids there, they don't mind cursing. Maybe some of them curse in every single sentence they say. So comes in and then they talk the way that the others talk as well.
So he said,
Sometimes it's a small thing, but still it's important to realize that we shouldn't talk like the way they do.
good job, man, mashallah. So he said the kids curse a lot at school, and they curse so much at school, the other kids, they don't even care about it, so they'll eventually curse at the same time, right? Is that what you basically, they'll curse as well. I think one of the sisters had something? Yes. Mm. Right, so you're following your peers. That's what peer is, your qareen, the person that's around you in your same grade, same class, same interest group. And you're following them. You feel the pressure to follow them. Because if you don't, what? You'll probably be excluded. You won't feel like you're a part of them, right? Anyone else? Last one? Yes, sir.
So in middle school, I realized that the older people, like, they sometimes bully because they're older and they get, and none of the people don't care.
Who?
Yeah, they look cool in front of you.
Ah.
Like, they don't even, and other people don't even care about, their bullying.
Okay. Did y'all hear him? He said the older kids, like the 8th graders, will bully the 7th graders or the 6th graders, and they don't even care that they're bullying you, right? Huh? Because it looks cool to bully, right?
To their peers.
It looks cool to their peers. So the 8th grader will bully the 7th grader because it looks cool to his fellow 8th grade peers, right? But the pressure was the pressure that he bullied them. He got pressured into bullying people. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. That's all. Okay.
And I would just add, those who are around, even though they know it's not right, they have a fear to do anything about it. That's really a major component of peer pressure. Right? Sometimes we'll sit there, someone's getting bullied, for example. It's horrible. It's like, it's beyond even fun. Like, it's just straight cruel, right? But nobody does anything about it. Why? Because they don't want to be seen as someone going against the grain, as someone going against what's cool. They don't want to be seen as uncool or not part of the crowd. So that is the pressure to do and not to do, right? That's what peer pressure is. And it's at every level. It really is. It's just in school, it's harder because you're all together all the time. You can't, like, leave the meeting, right? But when you move up, when you go to college or work or whatever, there's always an element of that. So it doesn't go away. We have to always be conscious of it.
Okay, my second to last question. So I was at a camp in your neck of the woods in California. So I blame it on you. I was asked by a young man, is there a such thing as halal snitching? Okay, so the parents, do y'all know what snitching is? Snitching, parents? Snitching means to tell on someone, right? So if someone, like there was one, when I was there was a kid, there was a bucket for one cabin. He had candy in it. So he took it out and he looked up and I was just looking dead at him like this. And he's like, right? So I could have snitched on him. I could have told on him to the cabin whose tub it was. So this is well known, like amongst boys and girls, I think, as well. Is there a such thing as halal snitching, or is that an oxymoron?
So I'm not sure how you answer that. I would love to know, actually. But let me approach it from a little bit different angle.
Bismillah.
If something blatantly wrong is going on, I would hope that there is enough in us for those who are around to prevent it without even having to snitch on anyone in the first place. You see what I'm saying? If they're throwing, little Johnny in the locker room every single day, and you see it, you're like, it's a little bit, okay, Johnny's a little annoying, but this is a little bit too much. I want to see people actually stop it without having to go and tell anyone to do it. You see? So that's like the level that we want to aim for, rather than we're going to go and tell. Now, if it's a matter of life or death or extreme danger, of course, then you must go, right? you know, we've seen some cases of violent bullying, right? Kid gets knocked out. He's on the ground bleeding. You can't just say, I'm not going to go snitch, right? We need to help that person. So of course there is room for that. But a lot of sort of the day-to-day stuff, we do have that ability that if we stood up, doesn't even have to be by ourselves, but as a 2 or 3, right? And you ever notice the one that does that, everyone respects them. Like you're kind of like, man, I wish I had done that. That person who kind of stands up and does it. And the ones who do the bullying, they are not tough when the circumstances get tough. They are the first ones to fall, right? They're the ones that like run off crying when they get challenged a little bit, right? Now, certainly I'm not telling you to do anything crazy. We want to be careful, use wisdom, right? But we should have this attitude of trying to prevent that in the first place without having to rely, because there's not always going to be people there that we can go to. You're going to be at lunch, there's no teacher anywhere around. What are we going to do? The imam's not there. Although, I mean, if I had Sheikh Abdullah show up in the middle school, khalas, be game over, right? So, and I hopefully you don't have a phone in middle school, otherwise you can pull up a picture like, dude, is that your dad? Like, you know? But so we need to, resilience is also learning how to solve our own problems. A lot of parents want to just sort of hover and just be there for every little thing. We want you to learn to solve your own problems, right? And part of that is going sort of, not against, but seeing what is happening and then trying to prevent that ourselves without having to rely on the snitching.
What are some practical ways to deal with peer pressure?
That's a great question, and again, I'm going to go to the experts for that answer. What are some ways to deal, practical ways to deal with peer pressure? Yes, go ahead. Snitch? Perhaps, if needed. Yes.
Think if Allah would be pleased or would not be pleased with the action you're going to do.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. So everyone hear that? Think, would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with this action I'm doing or not be pleased?
MashaAllah.
So if I'm using certain language or acting a certain way because everyone else is this what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to do? I saw a shirt one time that said, profanity is an immature mind trying to express itself. Right? Like they can't figure anything else out. So is Allah going to be pleased or not? MashaAllah.
MashaAllah. Anyone from the sister side? What's a practical way to deal with peer pressure?
Peer pressure, alhamdulillah.
Not at all.
They should teach us.
Not at all. What about peer pressure in social media online? What have you seen someone do, or what would you do if someone was to... And I think that takes place a lot with the sisters, the females, a little more than the males. Right? The online pressure, peer pressure. Nothing? Yes?
I guess you could kind of just make your own
Ma-
Like, kind of just think about it as, like, if this person, like, for example, is going to dress in that way, like, figure out a way to dress a way that pleases you, in a way where you're not dressing the same as them, but you're dressing in a way that pleases you and Allah.
Beautiful. In other words, put value in yourself instead of relying on other people putting value in you. Jazakallah khairan. The online world is real, whether we want to pretend it is or not. And a lot of people are there. And this is a very real issue of comparison, of looking at what others have that we don't have, of giving ourselves value based off what we're supposed to look like or what we're supposed to say. So when we give ourselves value, then, this will greatly help ease some of that peer pressure for sure.
MashaAllah. 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 So, MashaAllah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you, Sheikh. I really appreciate you touching on this and resilience. And there's going to be some questions with the Kahoot, inshallah, with some prizes, inshallah, from his presentation. for him talking about resilience, giving some examples from the Quran, the Sunnah, and peer pressure and ways to properly handle it. Jazakumullah khairan. Now we're going to move on to Brother Wudud. He has, as many of you know, he has spoken extensively in many communities about emotional intelligence and brought that to the forefront in the Muslim Ummah, alhamdulillah bil alameen. And he's going to talk a little about that now in regards to emotional intelligence for us as youth, students, and as parents, inshallah. And I wanted to mention there are some refreshments in the back for the brothers and sisters. I think there's some cookies and muffins, inshallah. Just take a plate and a napkin, and you're more than welcome to have them, inshallah. So, and we will go roughly for about 20 minutes, inshallah, and then we will have our town hall to where you can express yourselves, inshallah, if you have any pointers you want to mention, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan.
I think everybody needs a 5 minutes break.
MashaAllah. Guys, assalamu alaikum. Let's make it quick. Okay, we'll take a two. I know the older ones are handling it down over there. The Hamzas and the Tariqs and the Abdul Hadis are holding it down over there, right? Alhamdulillah. Get your plate and come right back. So while we're doing that, we'll take 2 minutes. Well, dude, can you just tell us currently what you're doing now? What are your current projects right now? And what do you have coming up soon to where the people can know, and how can they reach you?
Jazakallah khair, I appreciate it. All right. Bismillah. Salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. So, I was a teacher, and for a long time. I started off as a teacher when I was a teenager in Plano Masjid. Back in the days, we had a Plano Musalla before the masjid was there. We only had a few masjids back then in Dallas in the 90s. So I was the Sunday school, one of the Sunday school founders. Now, alhamdulillah, the Sunday school has 500 kids in Plano. I was a summer camp coordinator. I was the unofficial youth coordinator, youth director. So I accidentally got into this field of education. I was actually studying telecom engineering at UT Dallas, and I dropped out and went into education after somebody invited me in our community to come open the first full-time school in Plano. So that's how my journey started in K-12, and I was a teacher locally. I taught overseas in Dubai, came back. My wife was a teacher, certified teacher. We both started a few schools together, one under Plano, which used to be called ICC Academy. Then we managed IQA, which is on Richardson Masjid. I was the founding school director at Good Tree Academy. I was the head of school and middle school at Furqan Academy. Recently, I just reaccredited Good Tree Academy, and I was the head of school at Good Tree for a couple of years. One thing I observed, so in the middle of all of that, I went to Harvard, got trained to become a principal, and then went to Vanderbilt to do my graduate studies in education. And one thing that I really paid attention to was that even though we're calling our school Islamic schools, we're really worried about how to do as well as the public schools around us when we first started off like 20, 30 years ago. It was more about like, how do we make sure that we beat out the competition, or our kids are doing good academics? And nothing wrong with that, because every school needs to do good academics, good studies, right? One thing that we really missed out on was really thinking about what is a authentic model of prophetic education that we can bring back to our own schools, especially when we're doing our private schools. And I know that most of the kids here are in public schools. And one of the things that I've seen was kids were taught deen at a very kind of like do's and don'ts level, and not at an experiential level. And there was not much depth in the way that we were teaching kids about character. So that's how I got into emotional intelligence, because I was doing independent school leadership, and one of my focus was emotional intelligence, and we started. In the last 7 to 8 years, we have trained about 50 plus schools, 500 plus teachers, on just understanding that what was prophetic emotional intelligence. For Muslim schools, how was the Prophet ﷺ emotionally intelligent in the way that he did tarbiyah, or the way he taught, or the way that he parented, right? You know, the parenting and the teaching and the coaching of the Prophet ﷺ and the tarbiyah model, what is it based on? Because see, we are still in a post-colonization European copycat model of discipline in our schools that we're trying to recover from. Our discipline all about, like, you know, this suspension and then detention and then expulsion, and without having, a lot of our schools don't even have like the counselors, and schools that have counselors, there are so many kids they don't really have the right type of access to those counselors, and many of those counselors also lack the tools to actively do tarbiyah of the kids or coach the kids on these type of things that Dr. Umar just talked about, resilience, for example, right? How do you teach kids about, like, okay, these are the tools of resilience that you go back to? We had a Youth Allies program, by the way, today at the library, at Cosby Library. We're doing Youth Allies. Coppell, like 6 years ago, I was one of the lead curriculum designers for the city of Coppell when we designed a program to train citizens of Coppell on how to become active members of the community, and how to also, you know, despite our differences, respect diversity in the community. And many really important issues that we talked about was understanding and having this active listening, you know, this emotional intelligence, learning about conflict resolution. And this afternoon, we're at the Cosby Library, we're talking about how to also teach our youth, have, you know, effective tools to learn to, you know, process that conflict. So these are really important skills that we have to teach our kids. These are life skills. And our imams, our educators, our counselors, everyone needs to work together, our parents. So right now, what we are focusing on is bringing back this tarbiyah training in schools. We're trying to pilot it with a few schools. We had, started working with interns from Harvard, Columbia, University of Wisconsin, a few other schools that are trying to study a model we designed, we call the HEART model, on how is this model effective in really coaching and helping kids, you know, move forward and progress in their self-awareness, their mindfulness, emotional intelligence, and character transformation. So that's what we're doing. We're doing character development work, and inshallah, if you're ever interested in training your kids, especially when they get into like high school, where we have done some teens and high school programming, but a lot of our work has focused on, we've designed a curriculum for K through 5 so far. Like this summer, we actually did a summer camp at Frisco Masjid. We served about 330 kids, and we trained them on, you know, these curriculum that we designed on emotional intelligence, on character development, but focusing on the prophetic model. So let me share a little bit about what that is. If we have the slide up here on the screen. It's having some trouble. Okay. So I'll just share with you a story of the Prophet ﷺ, right? That the way that the Prophet ﷺ used to connect with the youth, and how the Prophet ﷺ used to transform the youth, the way that he taught them and coached them. And of course, this is more for our parents, but also for kids. I want you to listen to this and inshallah learn from some of these examples. Think about what are some of these, you know, examples of the prophetic character that you can pick up as a young boy or a young girl. And for parents, it's more for us. I know that I personally keep reminding myself about these things because I have 2 teenagers, and you know, they're going to middle school, and there's a lot that goes on with their development, and we as parents have to be there for them. The first thing about the Prophet ﷺ, and I will break down the HEART model, H stands for that healing presence. The Prophet ﷺ had this beautiful healing presence where he was really present with the person that he was speaking to or listening to. That the Prophet ﷺ would be listening to him in such a way that, how did the Prophet ﷺ listen? So let me just ask you guys, you know, if you came to the Prophet ﷺ and he's talking to someone, and you came, let's say I'm talking to one of the boys facing this way, right? And one of the girls just stand up and they just walk up to me here, and they just stand right here and they say, hey, Brother Wadud, and they want to talk to me, right? And if this was the Prophet ﷺ, how would the Prophet ﷺ make sure that he really, really listens to what you have to say. How do you think the Prophet would listen? Guys? He would turn himself and look at the person. What else? Anything else? Girls? Boys? How did the Prophet listen? How did he listen? The Prophet ﷺ, he finished with the person that he was with. He would really give them that full attention. And then he would, like the sister mentioned, that he would not just turn his face, he would turn his entire body. He would turn his entire body as if he was listening intently from the heart. And he would give you his full attention. And you felt this sense of presence that the Prophet ﷺ was listening to me. Amr ibn As radiallahu anhu, he mentions that when we used to walk in to the gatherings of the Prophet ﷺ, he used to embrace the worst of us. Not the best of us. He's saying the worst, like the trouble kid. The trouble kid that gives everybody trouble. And they're walking in, they're just like the worst kid in the whole gathering. Nobody wants to talk to this person. How do the Prophet, would welcome this person? The Prophet would go and just give them a big hug. Amr ibn As said the Prophet used to embrace the worst of us until our hearts would be softened. And when the hearts would melt, then they were ready to receive from the Prophet. They were ready to receive. So the healing presence that the Prophet had, think about yourself. I think about myself, and a lot of times I get a 0 out of 100. If my kids are all over the place, and they're coming to me and they want to talk to me, am I really there for them to listen to them? And we're human beings. We're not going to be able to do it all the time. It's okay to say, hey, Baba, I'm just really in the middle of something. Is it okay if I come to you and talk to you in a minute when I can give you full attention? That's okay. It's okay to ask. But that healing presence of listening to each other. How do you make friends? How do you make friends? You don't make friends by just, bragging about everything you do and how good you are. You make friends about genuinely being interested in the other person and listening to them and being there for them. This is who the Prophet was. That he had this beautiful healing presence. He listened. So this is what H stands for, healing presence. E, should I go over the heart model?
No, I have a question with regards to this.
Yes. I can keep going, so thank you for interrupting.
No, I love this because I'm going to speak from an imam's point of view, and please interject as well. You mentioned, and that's a beautiful hadith, Amr ibn As, the Prophet ﷺ used to embrace the worst of us, the troublemaker in there. So sometimes when we walk in the masjid, sometimes we will see some kids that they're all over the place. It's time for salah. And there's always like the one uncle that's known as the enforcer, or the sister, right? But then on the flip side, you have the brother that says, like, it's not my child, right? And when they go home, they're speaking about that child or those children. What would you advise in this regard, Sheikh? What advice would you give to us as parents, whether we're the first or the second, in regards to, because I've seen times where, the kid, and it's not the kid's fault, it's he loves to play, or she loves to play, or talk, or the iqamah may go, and I'll see someone just do this, and they'll turn around, and they know it's auntie, but they don't know who she is, they don't know who he is. That may have a kind of effect on them. So what would you advise in regards to that, inshallah? What have you seen?
So there was a time that I was that child.
Yes, obviously, yes, of course.
There was this one program I went to where I was this child. I was like the most popular kid in my class, and I took a bunch of my kids to the masjid, a bunch of my friends to the masjid, and I was just acting out because I was, all my friends really loved me. And so the mentor of the masjid, the youth mentor, actually after everybody went to sleep, called me on the side and had a one-to-one with me, and just said, hey, you know that you are gifted with all these beautiful talent. You know that, right? And you know that all these kids, they look up to you. But do you know that you're interrupting and you're disrupting and you're really not letting them really take full benefit of this program. And I just got completely quiet. I really looked up to this mentor, I didn't know that, because I thought that I'm like the ideal, I'm coming to the masjid and bringing everybody, but I was just like acting out, just not being self-aware as a, early teenager. And he just said, please take care of this, because these are amana. These kids that are coming to the masjid, they're amana. And I woke up next morning completely being aware, like, okay, you know what? I'm going to challenge myself.
What do you mean by amana? What do you mean by amana?
It's a trust. It's a trust. When you come to the masjid, you have the responsibility, not just for yourself, but also how this environment can transform everybody that walks in through the door. So when you distract this other child that could have come closer to God or become a better person, and because of the distraction you created, they're not able to do that, it's an aman, it's a trust. You broke that trust. But I would say that for the parents, instead of backbiting about this child, best is if somebody's friends with their parents, to just give them a big hug and say, hey, we're just seeing this, is everything okay? Is there something we can do? Or if there's someone that's a good friend with that child, or someone that child looks up to, just going and having that one-to-one with compassion and kindness. Like the model that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And that can hopefully transform. Dr. Omar, I'm sure, has a lot.
Any comments on this? E. So we reached H, now we're at
let me just finish the model so should check off like and shoot all the questions. E is that the heart model, when you really listen, then you're opening the pathway between you and the other person to really empathize where this person is coming from. Empathy is the ability to see where is this person, coming from, putting yourself in the perspective of this other person. Prophet had deep empathy for people. But this empathy, after listening, after having this connection, the Prophet had deepened that connection with something else, and that was affirmation. Affirmation. And affirmation was when the Prophet said something verbally or did something physically that made them feel included, listened to, safe, free of judgment. Like when you walk into a counselor's office and they say, this is a judgment-free zone. Just talk, it's okay. I'll listen. I'll be there for you. I'm here just to help you, support you. And the affirmation, once the Prophet did these three things, then he really captured the heart of the other person, and then he could give them the guidance. Then he would give them a solution. Then he would respond with a solution, but with compassion. And the last thing the Prophet would do with the T of the heart model is then he would turn to Allah and he would make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the guidance of this person. And I'll give you an example. Salama bin Muammar was a young boy. When Makkah fell, people were really, insecure, right? All these kuffar, the Quraysh, people that did not accept Islam for the longest time. And finally the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba walked in and they took over, and then all their security, everything is gone. And then people are now mass converting to Islam. So everybody's converting and everybody's becoming Muslim, but they're just new Muslim. They don't know really what Islam is yet. And this young boy, 16-year-old, he's making fun of Bilal radiallahu anhu's voice. Bilal goes up, calls adhan, and this young boy, Salama bin Muammar, he listens to the adhan of Bilal, and he's making fun of his voice. Like, what type of voice is this? And this boy, he actually had a very beautiful voice. So somebody heard that he was, mocking Bilal radiallahu anhu, and came and reported to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ called him. And when this boy came to the Prophet ﷺ and sat in front of him, he was scared, like, oh my God, like I'm in trouble. I'm done. Like, I'm in big trouble. Like this whole army marches in and, just the first few days and you become Muslim, you're just a young teenager, and then the commander of this army or the leader of this group calls you in front of all these people, like, oh my God. But why do you think kids act out? Why do you think teenagers act out or bully or mock or, why do you think they act out? What are some reasons that people act out, kids act out? Yeah? They don't know better. Okay, they don't know better. What else? Yeah? They want to be popular. Okay, they're seeking attention. Yeah. They're using their own anger or other type of emotions and they're channeling that, right? That's very mature. Anything else? There was one more hand. Yeah, maybe they're jealous. Maybe there's one of the word I was looking for is they're insecure themselves. If someone feels really loved and confident and peaceful and content, do they have any need to go and seek attention from anybody else? Or so this kid, this young man, so the Prophet ﷺ knew this very well. And he doesn't ask him like, just look at how what he's asking. He's not asking that, did you mock Bilal? That wasn't the question. The question was, when he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he sat in front of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ said, I heard you. So Prophet ﷺ, while listening to everything, he's really paying attention to what's happening with this child. What's happening with this young man. And he said, I heard you have a beautiful voice. And this kid is like, did I come here for that? Like, what is he asking me? I thought I'm in trouble. And he looked at the Prophet and said, yeah. And the Prophet said, would you like me to teach you how to call the adhan? Like someone who is mocking the mu'adhin to someone that understands the talent of this young man and completely redirects this person to something completely where he could take his potential to. And he's asking him that, do you want me to teach? Like, you would do that? Yes. And the Prophet started teaching him the adhan. And the Sahaba, some of them report that as the Prophet was teaching him the adhan, he would stroke his chest with his hand. He would do this to his, and a lot of times he would do that to people. You know, one of the Arab ways of giving that affirmation, and also he would make dua for people. Like the person who came to ask permission to commit zina, and the Prophet made dua for this person, put his hand on his chest and made dua for him. So he's giving him not just this verbal, teaching and compassion, but also his physical affirmation, responding with this beautiful compassion, and then he asks him something that he could never imagine in his life. He said, do you want me to appoint you as the mu'adhin of Makkah? And Salama, he reports this story crying, and he says that today they're gone, they're all gone, and I'm here calling the adhan. And this is the beautiful teaching and tarbiyah of the Prophet ﷺ. Healing presence, empathy with where people are coming from, affirmation, responding with compassion, and turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I will stop here for that, and then open up for.
MashaAllah. Jazakumullah khairan. If you can just reiterate, say the heart again, inshallah. Well, let's ask the audience. H stands for what? Healing. E? Sister, son? Empathy. Okay. A? Affirmation. R? Resilience. What's R? Responding?
With compassion. Responding with compassion.
Responding with compassion. And T? Turn to Allah. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. Heart, MashaAllah. Alhamdulillah. Sheikh, you have any comments you want to make on this at all? Does anyone have any questions? We have about 3 more minutes and then we'll move on to our next event, inshallah. Any questions? Comments? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to have a town hall and then have our kahoot, inshallah ta'ala. Now with this town hall, inshallah, what it's going to be is we're going to have, let's see, from our youth, let's get 2 chairs here and 2 chairs there. From the young men, if they can get 2 chairs, yes, 4 chairs. Oh yeah, I make them do it. I make the young boys do all that stuff, man. It's only right.